Hello, today we're going to be talking about Robert Ressler. He was born in 1937 in Chicago, Illinois, and he passed away in 2013. He was born to Joseph and Gertrude Ressler. He graduated from Schurz High School in 1955. At a young age, Robert and his friends were really fascinated with this killer that was dubbed the lipstick killer. He got a group of his friends together and they would pretend to follow and track this killer and hunt him. And this actually got him started on his career in criminology. This really just inspired him. He was fascinated by it, and he ended up joining the FBI in 1970 after serving in the Army from 1957 to 1962. He was stationed in Germany at the time, and during this time, he was in charge of solving crimes like homicides, robberies, and arson. Ressler was recruited into the Behavioral Sciences Unit in 1974, and they recruited him because at the time he was doing hostage negotiation, and his teachings were based upon the perpetrator's mental state. And this is really just similar to what was being studied in the Behavioral Science Unit, so they thought he was a really good fit. Between 1976 and 1979, Ressler interviewed 36 incarcerated serial killers. And in the beginning, that was really tough for him because people didn't want to sympathize with a killer. They didn't want to know about his bad childhood and about how he was abused and things like that. So it was really hard for him to even be allowed to go do this. He actually had to do this on his free time in the beginning, and a lot of his higher ups just really didn't like that until they started to see that his work was actually it was paying off. If you've heard the term serial killer, then you have heard of Robert Ressler's work. He's actually the one that coined that term. Robert Ressler helped to apprehend David Berkowitz, who is more commonly known as the Son of Sam. In 1977 was when the Son of Sam was apprehended, and this just goes to show that Ressler's work was really valuable. They used these criminal profiles to discover, based upon the crime scene and the acts that were committed, they were able to figure out what kind of person would have done this, and that's ultimately how they were able to apprehend the Son of Sam. He helped create the program called VICAP in 1985, which is also known as the Violent Crime Apprehension Program, and this facilitates communication between law enforcement agencies in order to compare cases and find key similarities that may help track the movements and capture violent criminals. That's basically like in Washington, a law enforcement agency in Washington would be able to communicate with a law enforcement agency in Florida or New York. They could compare evidence and ultimately decide that maybe there's a serial killer operating. That's actually how Ted Bundy was able to evade capture for so long. He was able to honestly stay under the radar. They had no idea that someone was operating in multiple different states for a long time because they just didn't have that kind of communication. And now that they do, they're able to figure out who's operating where, how many serial killers they might have. It's just a lot faster of a system. It's very valuable and it is just paramount in today's society. On the left, we have Robert Ressler. In the middle, we have Edmund Kemper. And on the right, we have John Douglas, which is Robert Ressler's former partner. And the gentleman in the middle is Edmund Kemper. Like I said, he is a prolific serial killer who was operating and active in the 1970s, and he was actually the first to be interviewed for the Behavioral Science Unit studies. Edmund has killed 10 people, including his mother and her best friend, and Edmund was a key subject for many of Robert Ressler and John Douglas's studies, and that is solely based on the fact that he really liked to talk. He got very in-depth with the depraved acts that he was committing, and this really helped them get into the mind of this killer and see what was going through his mind while he was committing these crimes. On the right, we have Jeffrey Dahmer, and on the left, we have Robert Ressler. He also interviewed and studied Jeffrey Dahmer, who was a well-known serial killer and sexual sadist. There's not many of us that haven't heard of Mr. Dahmer, and he was also key in these studies. Ressler had to get close to these depraved individuals to earn their trust. This is John Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown. He was also a prolific serial killer and sexual sadist operating out of Illinois. He was another one of Ressler's interview subjects, and Gacy even made paintings for Ressler in which Ressler was depicted as a clown, and this was a symbol of his friendship. So Ressler just really had to act like he was friends with these people in order to get information from them, which really became valuable in these studies. In 1991, Robert received the Amicus Award by the American Academy of Psychiatry and Law. He received 2 Jefferson Awards in 1986 and 1988 by the University of Virginia. In 1995, he received the Special Section awarded the Section of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. He received the Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with oak leaf clusters, Vietnam Service Medal, and Vietnam Campaign Medal. The last 4 were military achievements. In 1993, he published a book called Whoever Fights Monsters, and this was co-written by Tom Shachtman, and it was ranked number 3 in best-selling books under the crime category. And I do believe this is on Amazon. I was not able to find exactly how many copies of this were published and purchased. A quote from Ressler out of his book is, "There is no such thing as the person who at age 35 suddenly changes from perfectly normal and erupts into totally evil, disruptive, murderous behavior. The behaviors that are precursors to murder have been present and developing in that person's life for a long, long time, since childhood." And that goes back to that other thing we talked about, nurture versus nature. Is a person born like this, or is a person raised like this? And that is a timeless debate. Some more quotes by Ressler are, "Feeding that ego by consistently printing and televising stories about the murders was assuring that there would be more murders." And that just goes to show that a lot of these killers, they want their 15 minutes of fame. They want to go down in history, and that is one sure way to do it, to commit an act so ugly and heinous that nobody's ever able to forget about it. And by printing and televising, this is just going to make sure that everybody knows about it, and they're going to rave about it. Another quote is, "These children were deprived of something more important than money, love. They ended up paying for that deprivation during the remainder of their lives, and society suffered too, because their crimes removed many people from the world, and their assaultive behavior left alive equally as many victims who remain permanently scarred." And that goes back to them not getting loved as a child. A lot of them, you'll see their mother or father was either absent or abusive, and this is just something that Robert really wanted to touch on, because not only did people die, the perpetrator was also a victim as a child, and this just left a lot of people permanently scarred, including the families of these victims. Cognitive mapping and processing are aimed at self-preservation through reduction of helplessness, terror, and pervasive anxiety. They are introduced and sustained by our first 2 model components, ineffective social environment and unresolved traumatic formative events, and become established in the patterned responses. This is my works cited page. As you can see, I cited some of the websites where I got my photos, as well as the useful information that I used in this slide. I am Allison LeClaire, and I appreciate you for viewing. Thank you.